everyone to today's webinar hosted by ECIS. ECIS is the Educational Collaborative of International Schools, established for 55 years as a not-for-profit organisation. We have over 500 members in 78 countries. I am Georgie McIntyre, the Chief Learning Officer at ECIS, leading on professional development support for the international schools community. It is my pleasure to introduce today's webinar. Before I introduce our expert, I will mention you can include your questions in either the Q&A box or the chat box for Michael, and there will be an opportunity for questions at the end of the webinar. This is an unprecedented time for schools around the world, with each country having to make careful considerations on how best to manage any potential return to the new normal. Our international expert, Michael, is a globally respected educator, speaker, and science education author. A former marine biologist, he worked as a research assistant to a Nobel Prize winner, and leaving the laboratory and his instructor role at Boston University, he celebrated his passion in education as a K-12 classroom teacher for 10 years. Returning to graduate school, he completed his Ed.D. based upon his work in HIV, AIDS, and education. Michael will be sharing today his decades of educator experience as he offers a best strategy to educate upper elementary and middle school students about COVID-19. You'll learn how to effectively assume the role of teacher as you discover educational strategies and sophistication appropriate content. You'll also find out what school psychologists suggest for minimising anxiety. Please join me in welcoming and handing over to Michael. Good afternoon, Michael.
Well, thank you very much, Georgie, and welcome everyone to Talking to Children, students, about COVID-19. And I know that some of you may have seen me present a higher level version of this, which is recorded at ECIS. You can access it, which talks more about the science. This presentation is designed to address more of the pedagogy, and I'm going to be dropping the sophistication of the science down so that it's much more appropriate for teachers of these grade bands. Just again, a little bit of my background. As was said, I started out as a marine biologist, left the research lab, became a teacher, loved teaching K-12, did that for about 10 years, headed up a science department. And while I did that, I started writing textbooks, magazine articles, also hosted several dozen National Geographic specials, and I got a chance really to combine my two passions of education and teaching in the products that I had the opportunity to work on. But when I look back at the different pieces that I've developed, I'm probably most proud of a set which was wrapped around my interest in graduate school in HIV/AIDS education. I wrote the US national curriculum on that, developed a television show. In fact, we featured Dr. Anthony Fauci on this show 20 years ago when we were trying to keep kids safe from HIV. And now my focus is keeping kids safe from COVID-19. Disclaimer, let's put this one right up front. I am not a school psychologist or mental health worker. I'm a science educator with the goal of sharing what we know about student learning, behavior, and staying safe in a COVID-19 world. The goals for today's webinar are the following. One, I want to give an overview of the pedagogical approaches to teaching health-related topics in the classroom, or as it may be out of the classroom, doing it distance using the internet. I want to profile the best practices for talking to children. You're going to find that many of these practices, what I am doing is sharing what is posted out by the National Association of School Psychologists and the National Association of School Nurses. And I'll give reference to them later and give you the sites if you'd like to take a deeper dive to find out more about what they are saying for keeping our kids safe and healthy. I want to present COVID-19 at a grade appropriate level, which means I'm not going to be covering the higher end high school topics that I did before. This one, I'll bring it up to the cell, but as you'll see, we'll get to that content later. But it's basically out there to offer a foundation on which you can build so that you can construct your approach to your most effective way of teaching COVID-19 in the international classroom. I also need to point you to applicable resources, which will help fortify that arsenal of resources that you have. One thing that I've been doing since my return from Singapore several months ago was developing a Twitter account, which has on it various references and resources for educators. There is no cappuccino, there is no cats in my Twitter, in my tweets. All you will find are tweets that reference COVID-19 and also general science education. What I've done here as well is culled the resources and the references that I will make in this webinar and put them up as tweets. So you don't have to copy down all of these long URLs. Just go to this Twitter at DISPEZIO and sign up and follow me, and you'll be getting my daily tweets, which are focused, as I said, on COVID-19 and science education. I also have a much deeper dive so you can find out more about the science, and it's presented in a non-intimidating way. And I start with basics and bring you up to a fairly highly sophisticated understanding of what is going on in this pandemic. That is at covid19.michaeldispezio.com. Again, I have pointers on my Twitter, which sends you out to this. In my last ECIS presentation, someone at the end asked me about the Oxford vaccine. And I knew just a little about it, but you know, what I did was I went back and put this up as a blog. And the Oxford vaccine, I mean, these are the hopes for getting to that new normal as soon as we can, is the primary front runner. That, and there's an RNA vaccine that the US has. It's primary front runners in getting vaccinations. Actually, the Oxford vaccine goes into phase 3 trials this coming month. And the hopes is that there will be doses that may start to be given out in the early part of the fall to people that are in situations in which they might most likely be exposed to the virus. But we'll see how that develops. And actually, I'll talk more about the positive, where we are with vaccines, at the end of this presentation. In addition, my blogs will give you background information, especially for those that are teaching elementary and middle school in topics such as vaccinations. And here's a primer so you can understand what's going on. By the way, take a look at this image. I love this old print. Look at the fellow with the red vest and take a look at his arm. What do you see there? Yeah, it's a cow coming out. In fact, look at his whole body. You see cows coming out, and cows are coming out of people's ears, out of their faces. Again, referencing the fact that vaccination had a very close association with cows and cowpox. So do read this blog. It'll give you information that you might find applicable to share with your students or children. Also, I just started developing online science lessons, and these are 15 to 20-minute science lessons. The first unit I'm looking at is energy. You can get at it through HMH Science. Here is the Facebook address. Again, just go to my Twitter. This one is on energy, specifically on temperature, and you can see the particles moving. And what I do is spend about 15, 20 minutes teaching it, so you could use this in your own online teaching. You can use this video, and then you can piggyback on it. You can use it as a base for exploring this a little bit deeper. One more note. What you'll find today is really culled down. I'm working with teachers that work with a fair assortment of grade levels. So you're going to need to pull out what you think is most appropriate. Also, in the places that you are teaching, there is a range of suggested and enforced behavioral responses. And I'll talk about that as we go into this. You're going to find, however, that most of the directives that I'm going to be talking about are from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, the National Association of School Psychologists, and the National Association of School Nurses. And remember, things are changing, as I'll point out in some of these slides. So we're in an evolving situation. So some of what I'm presenting today, which is current, might be out of date in a couple of weeks. Hopefully not. Hopefully there'll be enough there. All right, let's begin. We are living, as you know, in novel times. Who could have ever imagined this? Who could have imagined 2020 would be like this? But I think all of us are concerned with keeping our children, our students, I always call my students my kids, keeping them safe and healthy is the primary concern that we have there. And I'm going to address that in 3 separate containers. One, we'll be looking at addressing anxiety in children. Another, we'll be looking at changing behaviors, how they can keep themselves safe. And with that, we need to have students construct a sophistication-appropriate understanding of COVID-19. Because as the psychologists will tell you, in order to change behaviors, one of the things that kids need is understanding. They need to know why they're doing it. Once people, and adults as well, know why, know the basics, the foundations of the situation, they become much more effective in changing and holding to changes in their behavior. Which means I need to look at best practices in teaching. How do you teach? And specifically, what do you teach? Let's take a look at how one effectively communicates a valid but non-threatening understanding of COVID-19 to children. First, you need to know your subject matter. You need to know what's about this. I'm not expecting, when I work with teachers, for all the teachers to have a college postgraduate understanding, but they need to have a viable and a functional understanding, foundational, so that they know what a virus is, why certain behaviors protect people. You, as teachers, know already, you need to know your audience as well. And when working with your audience, it's important for you to remain calm and reassuring. However, you need to acknowledge concern that there is something going on that adults are concerned about, but you need to remove all of the panic, all of the frantic emotion out of this. Again, kids are watching you, and they are looking at both verbal and body language, and from that, constructing their own emotional and conceptual learning. So you are the model. You have to be really careful. So you need to know your stuff, and you need to present it in a calm and reassuring way, because these kids are in a 24/7 immersion in this new world. You know, we're not seeing them in the classroom. Well, some of you begin to see them in the classroom again, but think of what their world is like at home, how much they're interacting, how much they're listening to adults, how much information they're getting. And some of that information is quite questionable. But positive things that you should be doing. One example is profiling the helpers, the people who are helping others, the healthcare workers that are out there, the people working in food supply, the people that are working in viral tests. Again, this needs to be set up so it is presented in a sophistication appropriate way. But do not forget those helpers and the positive actions of people, because all too often, you know, people will tend to look at the negative instead of the positive. It's important that as a parent and or as a teacher, you make yourself available, which means you need to be a good listener. Now, listener doesn't always mean hearing what they're saying. You have a chance here to work in multiple modalities. And what I mean by that is you can give the kids crayons and pencils and have them draw everything from what their feelings are to what they see to what they think COVID-19 is. And you have a whole other portal into their understanding. So do let them express their feelings. This is natural, and they need to share this. This needs to come out. Also, it's important to give them wait time. And as a teacher, you know the whole wait time scenario, that teachers seem to wait in some essence seconds, even less than a second, before, after asking something, they come up with the answer or pick some other student to pick the answer or to say the answer. Make sure you give the students wait time. This way, they're able to think, they're able to engage higher level thinking processes about the question or the statement that you pose. Now, for parents, guardians, you need to tell them you love them. And you look at that, I mean, these kids are in a crazy world. So parents, don't forget to tell these children you love them. You need, in presenting this to students and children, to avoid excessive blaming. Do not blame individuals, societies, people for what is going on. These are those negative feelings which don't lead to a positive construction of behavioral changes or understanding. You need to address hurtful actions. And this might be in the comments of others, because kids, students are hearing from others. And you need to address this and make sure that they understand that we live in a global community. This is not due to one person, one country, one nationality, one race. We're looking at something which is shared by humanity, and we're all part of humanity. On a local level, this might give you a platform on which to address bullying, but it certainly gives you a platform to address social injustice and Black Lives Matter, looking at the numbers of individuals of color who are affected by COVID-19, comparing that to a general thing. So again, we have teaching opportunities here that should not be missed. It's important that one monitors the television and the social media that students are exposed to. Here I place two very disparate concepts. One is in the Corona Task Force and the other is in Sesame Street, on what we want our students to hear and learn. You need to limit students' access to upsetting, non-sophistication, even erroneous material. They need to be in a situation which is appropriate for them to learn, so that they're able to understand and construct positive behaviors. Because if they have free access to social media or television, often they will find themselves in landscapes of increased anxiety. A great time to substitute other activities. Time for drawing, time for doing clay. Actually, this is a photo of my nephews who I work with in online learning. Every few days, we'll contact each other and I'll do a workshop with them and a presentation on a different topic in science. But I make sure to keep it interactive. There's something that they're doing. I can even ahead of time send out an email that has pages I'd like them to cut out. So it's all these things that you need to think about, how you can be creative. As I mentioned, drawing time is extremely powerful, and I love this one of the conception of what I am as a scientist from my nephew here. Don't try this at home. That's who he thinks I am. I love that picture. Anyway, drawing time. Drawing time is so powerful. And this might be the most appropriate, or one of the most appropriate opportunities we have for engaging in increased drawing time. It's a creative window. Students can express their emotions in it. They can develop fine motor skills. It engages visual analysis. It's a landscape for concentration and practice. And also, it's just plain fun. So again, when looking at activities to do with students who are not in your same physical space, where you cannot share hands-on materials, drawing is something which can be done in many of these cases. Make sure the kids have crayons, not pencils, because you're going to want to see, if you have the opportunity, see what these drawings look like. And pencil doesn't give you the density of seeing that on many web communication programs. Crayon gives you that darker, or markers give you that darker image, which you're able to see and comment on. Also, this is a great time to learn a second language. In learning a second language, I always go back to the brain research on this. We're looking at Japanese children, infants, who are not presented with English sounds. By the time they are 9 months of age, begin to wire out the capability to differentiate R and L. It's incredible. It has to do with language windows. Those of you who've seen me present before on learning in the brain know that this is one area which I'm very much interested in how one learns language. But we have now a situation with a great amount of at-home time, especially in international populations, where students might dive deeper into learning of a second or third language. It's important that parents know that they need to maintain a normal routine as much as possible. This is a great photo. Look at that. Look at that face on her. This is a 3-year-old presented with a brand new routine. She's not very happy. She gets into a routine. She wants to be able to work with it. So make sure that in these novel times, there is still structure, familiarity, that there is schoolwork, that the kids are still focused. And again, even when we're going into summer, there needs to be academic work in there. It may not be the traditional academic work, but you need to foster this ongoing learning, especially in situations where the learning has been so compromised in the past few months. Also, there needs to be routines that address physical health. You need to be honest and accurate in what you present, because you know where a child's imagination can go. And if they don't get the facts, if you're not addressing this, it can be horrible. You need to contain that child's imagination. You need to facilitate an appropriate construction of COVID-19 literacy, which means looking at both emotional and conceptual topics. You need to know the symptoms of COVID-19, and they need to know them in themselves and in others. And in fact, one of the scary parts when it comes to the spread is that you may not have symptoms. There are research reports coming in, I think from Iceland, that may place some of this as high as 70%, and that's at the high end, of individuals infected with the virus that causes COVID-19 may not show symptoms of this. I've seen other ones which place it between 30 to 50%, but know that a fair number of people who are infected with COVID-19 virus may not show symptoms, but yet they can spread the disease, which means students need to learn proper hygiene. Keeping students and children healthy. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention have a library of articles that you can download and read and share about all topics concerning COVID-19 and other health issues. Again, there is the URL, but go to @mdispezio and I point you right there. Keeping children healthy. We need to watch signs for illness, watch signs for stress. In fact, CDC also looks at stress and coping. So does the National Association for School Psychologists in the States. So take a look at that as well. Again, I point to them from my sites. You need to teach and reinforce preventative actions, help your child stay active, and also socially connected. And what I mean by socially connected is not that physical connection to other people. And we're going to see why that becomes even more important with some of the recent findings that are out there. We need to empower our children for behavioral changes. What can I do in order to stay healthy? And how do I keep my family and friends healthy? And a lot of this emerges from an understanding of COVID-19 and other infectious diseases. Because these days, as the World Health Organization points out, it's important that students keep up their vaccinations. This is not the only health issue. There are other ones that we need to keep kids safe from. So we need to get that knowledge out there so that there is reasons to construct changes in their behavior. And again, this comes out of the CDC. You can see a number of ways to protect students. Let's talk about that. One thing underlying this, again, I love to present it, is that currently there's no vaccine. There is no vaccine. However, we're working on several. Some of them, who knows, might be available for limited release starting in September. But scientists are creating this. We're putting a positive on where we are. But for right now, the best way to prevent getting the illness is not being exposed to the virus. Now, I have developed activities. These are parent-teacher resources, which you might find of use in your own classroom. And I developed them for Houghton Mifflin Harcourt. They are available on their site. All this is free. This one is on modeling the spread of germs, developed for younger children, grade 3 to 5 students. And it's activities that use very minimal materials which are found at home. You might want to visit that site. Again, there's the URL. Go to @DISPEZIO or just, Google me and you can get there. Clean your hands often. This has always been a mainstay of protecting students, and make sure you do it for at least 20 seconds, and do this after eating, after going to the bathroom, after blowing your nose, after coughing. Wash your hands, wash them well. And there is a wonderful, let's watch this Sesame Street animation.
Wash your hands for 20 seconds, just like Elmo.
And the nice thing about that song is it takes 20 minutes to sing. So if the kids learn that, or if they learn another poem, or they can recite the lyrics to a song, that takes 20 seconds. They know how long it is that they should be washing their hand. But it's resources like this which are most appropriate, obviously, for those younger kids. You need to vet all of the resources. Take a look at them, understand how they'll be used, what concepts and understanding will be conveyed. Are there any misconceptions that you need to address? But make sure that you vet everything that you suggest. There are posters, hand cleaning reminders. All this is available through CDC. Avoid close contact. You need to avoid close contact with people who are sick. Students need to stay at home as much as possible. And that's still there. You need that 6-foot distance. It's interesting, I say 6 feet here, but some of the latest research coming out in the States from places like MIT, also out of the West Coast, are these researchers who look at safe distances and say, yeah, 6 feet is safe, 7 is safer, 8 is even safer. And some of this research points to the spread, the ejection of pathogens when you sneeze to a distance of greater than 25 feet. So something to consider, that there is no absolute, but you get safer and safer by the more distance that you have there. And some people are at higher risk than others. Some people are at a higher risk to get it. I mean, it's a killer when you look especially at grandparents and their children. And if we look at grandparents and their children, we are facing a horrible change in our understanding. It becomes a world that's turned completely upside down as far as physical touching, as far as physical seeing somebody, embracing. I come from an Italian family. Everybody's all touchy. Suddenly, there is a barrier in that because you want to keep people safe. It's a world certainly turned upside down. And I have a face cover there, and face covers are interesting because let's just look at this coming from the CDC. CDC says that it's important for all individuals above the age of 2 to wear face covers, especially when they are not distancing themselves further than 6 feet away and they're out in the public. And they profile the fact that this protects others from asymptomatic spreaders, that if you are an asymptomatic spreader, by putting a face covering on, you will not release the virus particles out there. You know, it's interesting because there's a few other things. They say the cloth face cover is meant to protect other people. I want you to wait for this next slide. Everyone, as I mentioned, over the age of 2 should wear a cloth face cover when going out in public. And the cloth face cover is not a substitute for social distancing. Keep that 6-foot distance. Okay, here's that next slide. There is a growing consensus that contaminated surfaces are not the main route of COVID-19 transmission. Think about that for a moment. Suddenly, it's not touching things, bringing that up to your mouth. The growing consensus is that it is carried airborne, that there are aerosols which bring around the viruses. What we're looking at now, increasing evidence, increasing papers that are going into science journals. Many of the papers need to be peer reviewed because this is so quick and they're trying to get this out there, but you can certainly find it on the web, that it appears as if face-to-face, crowded events, poor ventilation, I think about that in terms of schools, extended periods of exposure, speaking like we're doing, yelling, even singing. There is references to a group of individuals who were in a choir singing within a contained space where many of them became COVID-19 positive. And people think that that came from that experience where they're singing in a closed area. You need to consider all of this. And you need to consider it in terms of what's called an infectious dose. We could certainly inhale, and again, it's not absolute, but what everything points to, and as if this holds true as with other infections, you can inhale a certain amount of viruses, and your body has an innate immune system which fights it off. However, if the number of particles are too great, if the concentration is too great, then it can establish infection. And that is what the infectious dose is all about. I've got a blog about that. It talks about exposure time. Again, go look at those blogs. They'll explain what is going on there, which means if you go into any contained areas with poor ventilation, you need to get out of there as quick as possible. This is what the research is pointing to as far as best protecting yourself from infection. Here's a couple of other tweets that I put up. And this is from the American Association Advancement of Science, and it's a journal article talking about the use, and this is fairly recent, this is from May 29th, the use of using face covers to protect yourselves, not to prevent the spread. But in this case, you can see the healthy individuals wearing that. And there's one from the American Chemical Society. If you're making your own face covers, it talks about what are the best types of materials to use. You need to cover up when you're coughing and when you're sneezing. You need to not spread this, and students and others need to be aware of this behavior. Throw away used tissues in the trash. Make sure you wash your hands. If you're sneezing, into your elbow. There's an art activity that I've got, which will be coming out, but I'll share it with you now, with young kids, where they can make a picture of themselves, draw an outline of their hand, cut that outline out, and make an art project where they put a tissue and cover up. And obviously, you're probably thinking of other ways that they can cover up that face to keep them safe. So think about this. This is all ways of looking at STEAM. We're bringing the art into STEM here to make students more aware of behavioral changes that are needed to keep them safe. Cleaning and disinfecting, the CDC talks about that. However, in young children, my suggestion is they need an awareness of cleaning and disinfecting. Certainly, they're cleaning their own hands, but many of the disinfectants, the surface disinfectants, are toxic chemicals, and you don't want to expose children to them or have children touch them or work with them in great quantities, but they should be aware of that cleaning process. So what have our children learned about health in schools? And I want to look at the US for a moment. In the US, by the end of grade 2, students have a concept of environmental impact on their health, also a concept of potential hazards, which directly references their lifestyle, such as the need for bike helmets or for seat belts. Also, they're presented with concept of needs to remain healthy and to prevent the spread of disease, such as influenza, cardiovascular diseases, and for me, especially since I live on Cape Cod, I look at this for Lyme disease, a pathogen which is transmitted by this very tiny deer tick. Also, students at this grade level become familiar with the concept of substance abuse, looking at alcohol, drugs, and how one goes about seeking help. If we look at the next grade band, 3 to 5, most applicable is having students describe how to prevent the spread of infectious diseases. Also examine how mental health can impact one's wellness. We're looking at depression, anxiety, stress, all things which are relating to COVID-19, and also to phobias as well. In addition, by the end of grade 8, now I'm taking it up through middle school, students begin to understand a susceptibility to infection, such as hepatitis, HIV, sexually transmitted diseases. We look at behaviors and disease health risks. And also, at this time, students begin understanding what the immune response is all about. So although in the previous grade bands, we are teaching an understanding of how to prevent the spread, we're not getting into the body's immune response. Basically, that waits to, some places they might do it at upper elementary, but at least at middle school, you begin talking about immunity. And also we begin looking at disease prevention and treatment. What about in science? Well, science is interesting when it comes to disease, because if we look at January 2020, we set up 2 different times. We have a pre-COVID-19 world, and we have a world once COVID-19 emerges onto that stage. Before this, kids have a concept in science of health and of illness. They know germs. They may not know what germs are, but they know that they're invisible. They can't really see them, but they can cause ill effects. They can cause, as far as viruses go, chicken pox. Some may know it causing influenza or flu, or some may know it as causing HIV. They may have a concept of a virus, but more likely, students in these lower grades know what a computer virus is. They know that it's nasty, that it spreads. They also have a concept of what medicines are and how these can be used to treat diseases. What about in the post-2020 January world? Well, COVID-19 becomes an everyday phenomenon. And suddenly it redefines the day-to-day experience. So there is a fair amount of street sense and also information which is not correct that is out there. Historically, what about viruses? If we look at the grade bands in which viruses have been addressed, well, really not at all in K to 2, tangential to staying safe, to becoming sick, and good hygiene. Grade 3 to 5, brought in with hygiene and health, talking about what germs are, not necessarily what viruses are, but connecting them to diseases such as chickenpox and the flu, talking about contagious diseases and how one can protect themselves, and also vaccinations being important as a way of maintaining your health and preventing further infection. Grade 6 to 8, the life sciences, we begin to look at the concept of microbes, what infections are, what therapies are, scale and structure, which might bring us down to learning a little bit about viruses. In grades 9 through 12, we're now looking at topics in biology. And this is where viruses, for many students, are first presented as pathogens, as these microbes that can impact an organism's health. They're certainly looked at in replication and what they can do. In higher level biology classes, they begin to look at viruses in genetics, in nucleic acids, and understanding how that impacts the rest of our understandings of heredity and genetic topics. If we look at science standards, NGSS, the Next Gen Science Standards, we find that Next Gen is very much focused on having the kids become good decision makers. And we look at phenomena-based learning and decisions that a student would make to remain healthy. And it is incredibly important that students use this foundation of science understanding to keep themselves safe. Now, if we go to the standards, and there's a free download for that. If you don't have it already, just put in Next Gen Science. You can go right to the site, download it, and you can navigate through the standards. But if you get to the standards page and you put that in to the keyword search, you'll find that it does not bring out any hits. This is a new teaching territory. It doesn't even bring out hits up in the high school level. So we need to teach virus understanding from the very beginning. And that means it's time for you to become a student. And if I was teaching to young students, I would look at two concepts of living and non-living. And they have an idea of what non-living things are. And they can look at living organisms and understand what the living organisms are as well. What's the difference between living and non-living? Well, many of them know that living things exhibit certain characteristics. They share. All living things have these things that they share. And then it is shown in the structure of what is called the cell, which is the basic unit that makes up your body. And the cells all share common characteristics of being that building block of life. Each cell can carry on the processes of life. It has structure and function. It has cell parts called cell organelles, which include that central control center, the nucleus, which you're no doubt familiar with, where the DNA, the blueprints of life, are located. We also have the mitochondria, excuse me, the organelles which develop the energy, produce the energy for the cell. We have an outer cell membrane. We also have inner cell membranes made of very similar substance, which line the inside. And we have protein factories that make a very important component of all living things, protein. It has both structural role and also biochemical roles. So proteins are very important. We need them because the proteins really make an individual different, not only from another individual, but from other species as well. Now, what about a virus? That's what a cell looks like. A virus is made of two things, just basically a protective outer shell in some sort of blueprint, which could be in the form of either DNA or another type of nucleic acid called RNA. The protein for a virus typically, well, it might have a much more complex structure, but I'm looking at a simplified structure. But typically a simplified structure really forms a shell in which that virus blueprint is safeguarded. And then we cover that up with more protein. So basically a virus is a protective shell and a blueprint. And in the case of SARS-CoV-2, what we're now looking at is the virus that causes COVID-19. It is wrapped in another layer, which is studded by proteins. And you might have heard of these proteins. These are the S or the spike proteins, very important in developing vaccines. More about that when I finish up. What about viruses? Scale and structure. SARS-CoV-2. Well, that is the viral particle. You can see it's mostly spherical. You can see that in this picture taken with a transmission electron microscope. They are extremely small. How small are they? Well, over 15,000 virus particles can fit one right next to each other and stretch across the head of a pin. That's how small these things are. You can't see them. Much, much smaller than the cells that they infect. If we also look at the structure, we can see here is SARS. Let's show you an example which shows the size of the virus compared to the cell which it might infect. So you can see a great difference. Now you might want to have students model this scale. Let's go back to the virus itself. The virus has an outer covering which is made of fabric, shown in red here. Believe it or not, that fabric is ripped off by the newly produced viral particles from a membrane inside the shell, and it gets wrapped around the assembling virus particle. And then it gets studded with these proteins, the S protein spikes that I mentioned before. Inside the virus, what do we have? Well, we have the virus blueprints. In this case, they're in the form of RNA, ribonucleic acid. But for students at this age, all that they have to know is that this is the blueprint that's used to make more viruses. So that's all a virus is. If you want, you can have them model this. Now, if we look at the stages of virus replication, and this is for elementary, middle school sophistication, I want to cull them down to several basic steps. One, the virus invades the cell. So we have a virus outside of the cell, and then the virus needs to get inside of the cell. Once a virus gets inside of the cell, it hijacks the cell. It takes over the cell's machinery, and it redirects that machinery using the virus blueprints to make new viruses. And then these new viruses are released from that cell into the environment, and they go off to infect other viruses, other cells. And that is what virus replication is all about. Something that the upper elementary and middle school certainly can grasp in sophistication. What about our future? And I look at our future and I see it in terms of this new normal. And this new normal itself is going to be set by something which we're looking at right now, and it's in the news every day, and it's vaccination. Yeah, we're going to be able to social distance, we'll be able to cover up, but really when we begin to looking at getting in confined spaces, when we're looking at bringing a lot of people together, vaccination is going to be that holy grail in our attempts of establishing a fairly stable new normal. To understand vaccination, and again, this is a little bit higher level, but it's something I think it's important for you to see because this is where the positive future is at. Antigen antibody reactions are at the basis of vaccinations. What vaccinations involve is injecting a foreign particle, a protein. Sometimes it could even be lipids. It doesn't necessarily have to be a foreign particle. These are called antigens, which are recognized by the body as being foreign. And the body looks at that and it stimulates and initiates an immune response. Part of that immune response, the higher level immune response, is producing chemicals called antibodies, which will wrap themselves around or connect, bind to that antigen, and in a way deactivate the antigen. I'll give you an example. Here is an illustration of a SARS-CoV-2 particle, the virus that causes COVID-19, and those red spikes are antigens. They're proteins which are recognized as being foreign. And if your body sees that foreign invader, it will react to it and begin to produce these antibodies. It'll take several weeks for these antibodies to be produced. So it takes a while for this response. You have other immune responses, but that's in a whole other presentation. But for right now, we're looking at vaccinations. And we get protected by having levels of antibodies in our blood. So if the real virus or the real pathogen appears, the actual one appears, our body is already prepped by having not only antibodies that are circulating that it can immediately lock, but already has the mechanism in place so you don't have to wait those 2 weeks to develop a viable antibody response to that foreign particle. What about the SARS-CoV-2 vaccines? Well, there's a whole new type of vaccine that's out there. We have the traditional ones, which are inactivated pathogens. So you have the SARS-CoV-2 particles, which are either broken down into parts or they're inactivated in some way. But the ones which are leading, the forerunners of the vaccines, are nucleic acid vaccines. And these can be either RNA or DNA vaccines. And what these do is they are just blueprints that we inject into an individual that hijacks that person's cells to manufacture virus proteins, not to make the whole virus, but to make certain virus proteins. Let's see how one of them works. This is the one in the US that's going to be going into phase 3 trials. It's an RNA vaccine, mRNA 1273. This is the Moderna vaccine, and it is a blueprint for making the S protein. And the blueprint is found on RNA, and it's delivered in a tiny little particle called a liposome, which is fancy word, a lipid. I mean, it has like a fat covering, the same material that's in a cell membrane, nanoparticle, a real tiny particle that has a lipid bilayer. And you can see that in this illustration right here. And what we do is we take the blueprint for making that spike protein, put it inside that particle. Next step is we inoculate a person with these nanoparticles. The nanoparticles go to the cell membrane. Since they're made of similar material, they fuse, the RNA gets released into the cell. That blueprint takes over the protein manufacturing sites of the cell, produces S protein, the spike protein from the virus, not the whole virus. The body sees those spike proteins, in response develops antibodies, and now we have a circulating population of antibodies which can stop infection if new virus particles that have those S proteins appear in the body. And that is how the RNA vaccine works. Now, I want to end this with the Oxford vaccine, because this may be the first one that's on the market right now. And this goes into third phase in a few weeks. And the Oxford vaccine is slightly different. Instead of having the blueprint on RNA, the Oxford vaccine actually uses a DNA blueprint. But the interesting thing, more interesting than that change in blueprint nucleic acid, is that the Oxford vaccine uses a weakened virus as its delivery. So it doesn't use a nanoparticle that fuses with the membrane. It uses a weakened adenovirus. And that weakened adenovirus has a change in its genetic code, so it does not produce symptoms of a common cold. And then what we do is introduce the code for making the S protein into that virus genetic code. And how this works is that within the inoculation, within the vaccination, these viruses target cells. When they get to the surface of the cell, they are brought in to the nucleus. There, the virus injects its DNA into the nucleus. The DNA, by the way, does not fuse with the chromosomes of the cell, but within the nucleus, it produces the message for making blueprints, sends it out to those protein-making factories, which make the proteins. Again, here is where it's similar to that RNA vaccine I mentioned before. They stimulate the production of antibodies, and then you get protection. No one knows how long this protection will last. I mean, that's a whole other webinar. But this gives you an idea of where we are heading with vaccinations and the positive direction. So we're going to be in that new normal. And the way that I look at it, this is certainly a time of challenge, but it also offers an opportunity for you as teachers or as parents to assume, to create, to construct a whole new role in children's education. And on that point, I want to end this webinar, and I'm going to pass it back to Georgie, and we're going to wind up entertaining questions from you. Don't forget that the resources that I have at DISPEZIO, that'll send you to all of these places. If you'd like to go straight to the blog, it's at covid19.michaeldispezio.com. Twitter at DISPEZIO. So your resources are there. And on that note, I will stop talking. And thank you so much for being with me.
Thank you so much, Michael. There's just such a wealth of information here. And I'm sure that our delegates that have attended today have found it extremely insightful. I think, you know, the considerations of how we can support and reassure our children, you know, are absolutely key at this really, really difficult and challenging time. We don't actually have any questions at the moment, so I just really wanted to wrap up and just wait while if anyone wants to offer us up any questions around what you've shared with us. As I mentioned, we will be sharing out a copy of the webinar today, and also all the links that you've shared with us as well, Michael, and you mentioned a few other bits before we actually went live, which would be great to actually share out to our delegates. This is part of a series of free webinars that ECIS have been offering. You can access those on our website, and they'll continue all the way through the summer and the autumn as well. And we're planning on offering a series of subjects, specific webinars with Michael over the summer, which will be focusing more on sort of general STEM subjects and less on the COVID aspects, given that we've got such a valuable expert here with us at the moment, Michael.
But you know that what I'll do is, although I'll be talking about general subjects in science and STEAM education, I'll also give a short little update to where we are with the development, especially looking at that Oxford vaccine.
Yeah, that'll be fantastic. Let's fingers crossed that's successful.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for today, and I'm sure that the attendees agree that it's been really, really helpful. We know it's still quite early for you at the moment, so we appreciate your time, and I'm really looking forward to catching up with you very soon, Michael. Please take care.
Okay, thank you all so much, and bye-bye, everybody. Stay safe.
And you. Bye-bye.